Welcome back, and thanks for joining me for another segment. If you are enjoying these segments, please do hit like and subscribe. I'm taking a few more of your questions today. This one is from Holly Valleja, who says, I'm surprised to learn how TV and movie scripts can be revised by someone other than the author and that the author's permission isn't needed. In such a situation, what if the revisions were contrary to the author's beliefs? Maybe she wouldn't want their name on the credits. Yes, I wrote such and such, but that's not what I wrote, nor what I intended. Okay. Yeah, an interesting thing with film and television scripts that, in a sense, they have your permission because you have been paid to write the script, and along with that comes the permission for it to be rewritten. So you have those choices as a writer. You can try and have all kinds of stipulations that say, no, only I can do rewrites, or you have to have my permission. But I'm not sure if there's any writers who have that kind of clout. There might be some really big, but if you're trying to get going and you're grateful to have some of your scripts purchased and produced, then that's was my first priority, to say, okay, good. It's important that this gets made and that I get a screen credit, even if I feel like I don't recognize as much of what the final product is. It can be frustrating because you have a vision and clearly somebody else didn't see that vision, or a lot of times it's budgetary, that it's like we just can't afford in the budget to shoot that scene or have that happen. They're having to simplify for budget reasons. So it's not thrilling as a creative person to feel like someone's messing with your work, but I've grown to understand it, and in some cases, and in most cases, recognize that it can be necessary, and also that it's such a subjective business that no two people are going to see a story or tell a story the same way. So can get into, sometimes I think the revisions are better, sometimes I think my original thoughts were better. It's so much opinion, but it is what it is. And in theater, they can't do that. It is the writer's work in the theater. So if you are that personal about it, then that's your best option, is to go work in the theater where you can control that script more. Sad but true. And then, do you like costumes they sewed for you? And do I have any costume mishaps stories? It depends on the show. I've done guest spots in shows where I didn't love the wardrobe I wore, but it was right for the character. That happens a lot. It happened to me in the Waltons all the time. It's like, oh, this wouldn't be my first choice of what I'd be wearing, but it was the time period and it was correct for the time period. Most of the time we've talked about that, but we won't go down that road right now. And sometimes I've had fabulous costumes, and sometimes for theater they didn't fit real good because costumes get used and reused and reused, and so you might be wearing something that was altered for somebody else, or so it really kind of depends. In terms of that, I haven't had the opportunity to have a lot of costumes specifically made for me. Although the first musical I did, when I did Cinderella, my costumes were built in New York at a very famous sort of costume for theatrical costume place, and so that was very exciting, and hasn't happened since. I've had some pieces made, and sometimes I love pieces that I get to wear and wish I could take them with me, and it's not a choice. Okay, costume mishap stories. Gosh, yeah, I remember doing Hello Dolly that it wasn't a personal mishap of mine, but the waiters in the Harmonia Gardens, when they have a huge, like, very athletic dance number that goes on, and these poor guys were constantly splitting their pants because of the dance moves they were doing. So that was happening, and they go back and they'd be pinning them up, and they'd be trying not to be stabbed by the pins. Sometimes with fast costume changes, you cannot quite be finished, and hoping that, it's like, oh, my skirt's about to fall down and I'm trying to hold on to it because I didn't have time to fully button it up. So those types of things are always an adventure. Yes, and sometimes you trip over costume pieces or things like that, or having to have fast wig or hair changes where, you're getting yanked around, you're busy going, I gotta get my clothes on while somebody's yanking your hair, going, I gotta get your wig on right, or pin your hair. So they're not really mishaps, but they're adventures, and you never quite know what's going on. Then you were asking, some of the Hello Dolly costumes aren't exactly easy to move around quickly with trains and tight collars and necklines. Yeah, that would happen. And so having to do certain dances where you're having to sort of make sure you don't trip over your costumes, and so you're learning to sort of like kick them out of the way so you don't trip over them and other people can step on them. Nancy MG asked, do you still have an agent looking out for roles for you? Yes, I do. And you want to know how that works and how it works for writers as well. Agents, basically, there are what they call breakdowns that go out where any company that is looking to do a project, there will be, it will go into sort of a collective document, whatever you want to call it. It gets sent out to anybody who has access to that. Not everybody can get access to it, and it's a paid subscription, usually, is what it used to be. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but agents have access to that, and they will go through and they'll go, oh, such and such a company is doing this project, and it'll list the key people, who's producing it, if there's a director, if there's a writer on board, different things like that. And then it will break down, it'll have a little synopsis of the project, and then it'll list the various different characters that are in it with brief character descriptions that include age and type and ethnicity or any specific things like that, how big a role it is, whether it's a starring or a guest starring or just a small, kind of day player type thing. It might just, say it's only certain, 3 lines or something. So all of that will be in that information, and then agents will go through their talent database and think, okay, this role of Maggie, it's, a woman in this age range and she's this type of character. And they'll think, who are my clients that I think might be right for that? And then they will submit you to the casting director, whoever's doing the casting, usually casting director, and to be considered for the role. So that's kind of how that works. And since I don't have an agent as a writer, but I'm guessing it's similar. And then sometimes people know about projects that are happening or things that are in development. They might have other clients who have projects, and so they can package things together and try and, someone wants this client of theirs, but they go, hey, now they know about the thing, so hey, I have these other clients who might be right. So those types of things will happen as well. That's kind of how it goes in terms of an agent looking for work for you, is just what they hear about, what they hear through the grapevine, what comes through the breakdowns, things like that. And then you just said, I know there are a lot of great roles and characters out there in the making, but seems finding the right actors to play them must be a challenge on both sides. Yes, indeed. And sometimes it's like who people think of. Casting directors have their short list of actors that they know will deliver certain types of roles. So that becomes a factor. And they will only see so many actors per role. A lot of the work that I did up in Canada, when I'd go in, there might only be 6 to 8 actors that were even called in for the part. So that's up to that casting director to decide who they think are their top 6, 8, 10 actors to bring in that they trust will deliver, because their job's on the line as well. If they don't deliver to the producer and the director, people that are going to do a good job and be right for that role, then next time they won't get hired to cast the thing. They're putting their faith in you to come in and deliver a good job. And I think sometimes they'll do a handful of people that they think are spot on. They've seen them do that, and that what looks like the interpretation of the role. And then they might do a couple of people that they think might do something different and interesting, that are quirky in some way that maybe nobody would think of for that role, but they think might be interesting, just to give the producers and directors a different look and a different thought of an angle it might go. And actors will do the same thing in terms of their choice about how they how they play that audition, that character. From Jack Kirby Fan, he asked, I've been reading about the actors' strike and how so many actors are just struggling as they don't have the cash flow to survive. Some are washing windows and doing whatever it takes to generate an income. Once again, another example of not seeing the big picture. We think of the major stars and are forgetting the everyday actors that struggle to get 3 roles a year. Yeah, it is. It's a tough situation here with the strike. People are just dealing the best way that they can to get through it. And actors so much of the time have to have side jobs anyway, but they have to have flexible jobs because you still want to be available for auditions, or when you get a job, you don't want a job you can't have a job that's so restrictive that you get work, which is what your primary goal is, and then you can't do the work. And the thing with acting is because you never know when your next job's going to be unless you're doing a series. Anytime you get a job, you don't know how long that paycheck has to last. You need to figure all that out, and people have different ways of doing that. But, this is a tough haul for the actors and the writers. So appreciate those of you who recognize that and are looking beyond that handful of people that you hear about that make the big checks, and do keep in mind the little guys who are just trying to make a living at it just like everybody else. And then you also said, I also read about so many writers who don't get paid for their work immediately and often have to wait for months and years to get a paycheck, if at all. Interesting things happen. It depends on what kind of a deal you make. You will get paid at the time you do the work. So unless you've agreed to some sort of a speculative type situation. I mean, certainly writers write scripts on spec. They write something without knowing if or where it might be sold, and then they try and shop it, or they try and work with people to raise money to get it made. And so you might make different sorts of deals then. But if it's at all involved with the union, which is the power of the unions, then you have to be paid for your work. I am not in the writers' union, so when I have done things where I wrote, they didn't fall under the Writers Guild, so I had to make my own agreements with producers about compensation and stuff. Usually when they talk about things not getting paid for some time, like even with small, very, very low budget things, there are union minimums. So I think it's like about $110 a day is union minimum for those really small budget things for actors. But there can be deferred things where it's like, well, this will be paid when such and such happens. And actors might agree to those, and writers might agree to those if they want that opportunity for some reason, if it's important and valuable to them. Or you're doing it to help friends. I've done those types of things where it's like, yeah, I'll come in and I'll do a day of work for you because you're my friend and I want to support you trying to get your project going. We all rely on that, on other people, on calling in favors, and so you return those favors then, or pay it forward. So that happens. The sort of percentages, when you have a share of the profits, that's the stuff that you rarely see because films on paper never seem to make a profit. So there can be very little profit participation involved, and that can happen for actors and writers, and it can happen for investors, where a certain threshold has to be met before there's going to be any payback to the investors, and that has to happen before there's any profit participation on behalf of writers, actors, or anybody else that directors, all of that. So that's, I think, might be what you were referring to in terms of not seeing it for some time. Thanks for joining me once again as I have been answering more of your questions. If you have a question, put them in the comments below, and I will try and take up as many of them as I can. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.